All right, for this tutorial, we're gonna kind of just play around. So this will help you with your character composition project. But for now, I just want you to open up a blank document just to kind of mess around in. So here we have just a letter document. Doesn't matter if it's up and down or side to side. We're just messing around today. All right, the first thing that I'm gonna want to point out to you guys is the layer palette. We have not talked about that yet. And it's kind of helpful if you're going to start working with more complicated things. Up to this point, we haven't had anything super complicated, but if you have really big projects with a lot going on, it helps to kind of break them up into layers as you're editing. So if you do not see your your layers palette over here, you're going to go to Window, scroll down to Layers, and select that, and it should pop up for you. Sometimes it appears very long. Sometimes it'll pop up like this. You can adjust it accordingly how you want it. But what I want you to notice is right now on the bottom of that window it says one layer. So there's only one layer on this. If you want to add layers, you can go over here and you can do create new layer. So now you can have multiple layers. And what's cool about that is let's just quickly here make some shapes. So here I'm on layer 4. I'll click on layer 3, layer 2, and then layer 1. And let me adjust some of the coloring here. And those of you that have taken GIMP or Photoshop classes might already be somewhat familiar with this feature of having layers. But if you're not, tune into this because it's very helpful. Okay, so now I have these 4 different layers with colors going on. And the nice thing is that you can take these layers and you can drag them and change the order. So let's say I want the pink on top. I can click on the pink layer, and I can even name that layer if I would like to. How do I name you? Oh, there we go. Just double click it. So you can do like pink box. And then you can click and drag this up. I know it seems silly to label them right now, but sometimes you can work with 60 layers, and it can be really easy to just kind of quickly label them so you know what they are. So you can click and drag the order so that one is on top, one's on the bottom. We kind of talked a little bit about this before where you can, if they're all in one layer, you can right click on it and you can send it front to back, but this is another way to do that, so you have on different layers. The other nice thing about this is let's say you have a lot going on and you want to just hide certain layers and just look at one layer and say, okay, what's going on there? Okay, now you can isolate just that one shape, see what vectors you're working with, and it can make it a lot less complicated. If you don't have them on separate layers, you can't do that, and it can get really confusing with all these different anchor points and paths flying through your image, okay? One other thing that you can do is let's say that you have a whole bunch of objects here and you're trying to click on one and you can't seem to click on it because there's so much stuff going on. You can go over here to your layers palette and you can actually lock layers. So even though that pink box is hidden behind all of these, it's the only layer that's not locked. So no matter where I click pretty much on that, it's going to let me move it. For example, if all of these were unlocked and I tried to click on the pink box and I clicked over here, it's gonna select the image that's on top, basically. So very quickly, that's layers for you. So I'm gonna delete all that stuff and gonna just kind of trash some of these layers here. Now I have one layer again, blank palette. So here we go. We worked with creating and working with layers. So I guess just take a moment here and play around with layers, add some layers, create new layers, and then maybe put a couple of shapes on each layer and just kind of mess around with ordering them and playing around with the visibility and the locking features. All right, next up, let's get into our project a little bit. So I know it's a little intimidating to be told to create a composition with only black and white and using one character. Sometimes what can be helpful is to just break up your picture, break up that white space. So what we can do is just take our pen tool, and again, we're working in black and white, so make sure you select black, and then your stroke can just be none for now. Click the little red slash, okay? And we're going to go ahead and just break up our white space. You can do a straight line, you can do a curved line. And this gray space on the outside is just my working space. So it doesn't really matter if it goes off. If I were to print this image right now, it wouldn't even print anything outside of the page. It's just a workspace. Alright, so there I created some black background shape. So go ahead and do that. Just kind of break up your white space by making a big black shape that kind of interrupts that white space. Once you've made it, if it's kind of confusing to see what you're looking at, you can always go to View and then do Presentation Mode. And if I click that really quickly, you're going to see that it'll show you kind of, that's what your document's going to look like if you printed it. There's a little black border on each side, but you get a kind of a clear idea. And then you just hit Escape to get out of that. Okay, so next I'm going to have you guys go ahead and select your type tool. You can hit T on the keyboard as a shortcut. And you're just going to click one time, not clicking and dragging, just click one time and do your whatever letter or character that you chose, or you can just do a random one for now because frankly this is just messing around. And then once you do it, you might want to have your make sure your type window is open, sorry, character window, so do Command T if it's not up already, like mine wasn't. And let's go ahead and make it nice and big. There's a 72 is the largest that it scrolls to, but you can also click on that 72 and you can manually change it to like 400 if you want, or 1,000, or 2, you know, which would be tiny, but you can manually type in whatever size you want. So I just did 400, but it can get to be kind of tricky, you know, if you have all these text boxes going on, so it might just be easier for you to go ahead and change this into a vector. And there's another reason I'm going to have you change it into a vector, but we'll get to that in a minute. So for now, select your letter, and I want you to go to Type, and then Create Outlines. And that will turn your letter into a vector. Now, the plus to this is it makes it a little bit simpler to adjust things and rotate it. It kind of, there's a lot of different benefits to it. The only negative is that you can no longer use the type tool to like edit this any longer. So all the edits that you're doing now apply to just vectors in general. So you can adjust the stroke, you can adjust if it's white or a black cue. Alright, so go ahead and do that. And then I want you to move your letter so it overlaps with your black space. And we're going to play around a little bit more with Pathfinder, which you've already tinkered with because we did this kind of Notan project previously. So you're just going to move it into your black space, and then I want you to go to Window and Pathfinder. So your Pathfinder window opens up if it's not already. It's paired with Transform and Align. So if you have the Align window open, then Pathfinder should be next to it. So go to your Pathfinder window, and I want you to take your, not your direct selection tool, your selection tool, and select the letter vector that you've made and the black space. And let's play around with Pathfinder a little bit. So if we go to Unite and hover over that, it says Option click to create a compound shape and add to shape area. So if we hit that, let's see what happens. Boom. What it did is it just kind of erased that middle area and just combined it with the other area. So that is helpful if that's what you were trying to do, right? Let's do Command Z to undo it. Now I'll have you click on minus front. So that says Option click to create a compound shape and subtract from a shape area. So let's go ahead and click. Now it did the opposite kind of. Instead of adding the black, it kind of subtracted out that white. Let's do Command Z to undo it. Now we hover over the next one. It says intersect. Option click to create a compound shape and intersect shape area. So let's click that. All right. Now we're starting to see a difference in how it is affecting. So now that's the vector that's left over. Took out everything else. and exclude. So we'll click that one. And that's kind of neat. So what I want you to notice about exclude is I'm going to go to my direct selection tool. And if let's say this white area is really cool and I want to select that, I can't because it's actually not a vector. It just removed it completely. So there's all these black areas are the vectors. So let's do Command Z to undo that. So those are the shape modes. And then underneath is the pathfinders. And divide is what we used last time. So if you hit divide, that's pretty helpful because now I have, if I use my direct selection tool, this is its own shape, this is its own shape, this is its own shape, and the big background is its own shape. So at this point I could select this inner part of my cue and I could change that to white. And that's kind of like what one of the other ones up here, but this time I can actually select this area and I can do copy, Command C, Command V, copy and paste it. And let me zoom out a little bit. And I can move this and add more of these and kind of tinker around with that copy and paste just that part of the cue. Okay, so what we call this in the art world is a figure-ground relationship. So another way of saying that is positive and negative space. If you've ever heard of that, it's kind of the same thing. They're synonymous. So you're playing around with what is positive, what's like looks like the main subject becomes the background becomes the foreground, and it's really fun to play around with that. So go ahead and just tinker around with these options here. I'm gonna just undo. Okay. One more. Let's just kind of keep tinkering here with these options. Trim. Let's see what happens now. It made. And you can just grab your direct selection tool and see. Okay, now it made this its own shape. It made that its own shape, and it made this its own shape, and it made that its own shape. So I guess what I want you to do here is just play around with the Pathfinder's options. And you're going to see a lot of amazing, cool things you can do. A lot of different ways that you can alter your vectors and your shapes. So just go ahead and play around with those things for a little bit. Okay, the last thing that I want to cover with you is just how to create, quote-unquote texture, the element of texture in this project. And that's as simple as just repeating your character over and over again, but kind of in a smaller, well, I guess it doesn't have to be smaller, but usually smaller kind of helps imply texture. So we're going to go ahead and click and drag with our text box. And right now my font size is 400, so I'm just going to change it to like 30. And then I'm going to just go Q. And instead of just typing this forever, I can do Command A to select all, Command C to copy, and then I can do Command V to paste. Quickly fill in that space. And now that can be a really lovely implied texture. And here I'll take my big Q and maybe I can make. Alright, so now we're already seeing an issue here. It's getting difficult for me to try and select this big Q because all of this font is here and this background is here. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, we like to use layers. So I'm going to go ahead and do Command X to cut that out. I'll go to my other layer and then do Command V to paste it. And then what I can do is actually lock that other layer so I don't accidentally select it. And now, even if I click on these little Qs, I'm not going to move them around. I'm only selecting this big Q. So I can adjust the size, go ahead and rotate it, and then I'm going to unlock the layer. I'm going to select the background, and let's see, now this is why I have an issue here. I'm going to actually take that background, or maybe these Qs, cut them, paste them on their own layer. Because they're kind of obnoxious. They take up a lot of my space here. Anyway, those are kind of a little implied texture, right? Because they're repeated over and over. And that's repetition. That's another element here. Or, I mean, principle, actually. So we'll go ahead and lock that one. select this cue and select this background piece, and now I'll play around with my Pathfinder options. Make this white. Now I can start to move these things around if I want to, reveal those cues underneath, or not. I can copy and paste it, play around with. And I'm not even saying that I'm doing this, guys, but you want to be switching back and forth between your direct selection tool and your regular selection tool as you're selecting things, because the direct selection tool is always going to pick up on the paths and the vectors and the handles, which is helpful if that's what you're doing, or if you want to select something really specific. But if you're just trying to select a whole shape without getting into the complexities of the paths and vectors, then you're going to want to use the direct selection tool. All right, so okay, I think I covered it. Let's just review really quickly. We have learned how to, learned how to create and work with layers by locking them if you need to, so you don't accidentally select something you don't want to select. Definitely work with layers. Definitely label them as needed. Breaking up the background by just creating a large black shape. That's a good place to start for this project. Converting type into vector. So just real quick, let's review that. You go to type and then create outlines, which is grayed out right now because I'm not selecting anything. So create outlines. Oh, and I just remembered why. We discovered that it's really easy to forget that you cannot do Pathfinder, any of these options, unless you've turned your type into a vector image. So if you're trying to do Pathfinder and it doesn't seem to be working, it could be that you forgot to do type, create outlines. All right. The next thing is playing around with Pathfinder options and then creating texture with type by repeating it over and over and over again. So that is it. Hopefully that helps you with this project and gives you some more tools in your toolbox to continue on.